It's the 1830s, and imagine you're traveling on horseback through the Rocky Mountains of Western North America, land belonging to the Crow Nation. Night is falling, and you can spot smoke and light of a camp in the distance among the trees. As you draw closer, you begin to wonder if you may be dreaming, because before you is a crew of fops and dandies, some gallivanting in the nude, others dressed in lavish medieval clothing, made of bright velvets and gold trim, dancing together. But no, you're not dreaming at all. This is, in fact, the odd expedition of an eccentric Scottish aristocrat named Sir William Drummond Stewart, who fled to America and the Rocky Mountain fur trade to escape scorn over his homosexuality, allegedly, and to seek freedom in the wilderness. For a brief few years, he found it. As I've discovered many times before, the Old West was so much gayer than we've been led to believe. The wide range of opportunities in budding new settlements and industries gave many people a chance to escape their past and try to live more authentically in the West, whether that be as farmers, railroad workers, cowboys, miners, or fur traders. The fur traders in particular were known to be rather flamboyant and androgynously dressed, and fond of drink and partying. It was an enticing draw for a number of gay men, with a proclivity for outdoorsmanship, including our strange Scotsman. But the Old West was obviously not without its own prejudices and trials and tribulations. Come learn with me. Side note, I'm sure almost all of you have been hearing about and hopefully paying attention to what's going on in Minneapolis. It's obviously not just Minneapolis, but the whole country. Things are very grim, and I want to implore you to help make a difference in these communities getting hardest hit right now, however you can. So I will spotlight one fund you can help in particular. Powwow Grounds Coffee is a native-owned coffee shop in Minneapolis that is gathering donations for the protests and for community outreach and support. I've linked their Instagram below, where you can follow their efforts and find their link tree, where you can choose how you want to donate. We will be discussing some historical Native issues today, and a historical white dude who was not exactly an ally, but you can be, and we can all do better by the people indigenous to where we live, and the people most vulnerable to oppression. This is one of those ways. And by the way, if you donate mutual aid funds to Powwow Grounds, you can email a screenshot of proof and your address to stickers@hushfallarchives.com to get a free sticker from the Hushfall Archives, where I got this bandana from, one of my favorite trans-owned indie clothing brands. So, now let's get into it. But first, I have donations to pay too, so let's hear a word from today's sponsor, EveryPlate. As someone who is super busy and often too tired to come up with dinner ideas, I cannot speak highly enough of EveryPlate. Like, sometimes it's 6 p.m. after work and you open the fridge and you realize that you're an ingredients household and takeout is expensive, so what now? EveryPlate has been an absolute game changer for my wife and I, taking the pressure off of us after a long day while still giving us a chance to cook, which is something we genuinely love to do. EveryPlate is a service that plans, gathers, and delivers all of the ingredients and recipes that you need to cook delicious meals at home for an affordable price, with ingredients perfectly measured for exactly what you need to cut down on food waste. It's just so convenient to be able to just go grab a bag of ingredients and have recipes ready to pick from with everything that I need ready to go. No last minute rushes to the supermarket because I forgot something vital, and I was blown away by how good the recipes are. Seriously, I've used EveryPlate for a long time now and have actually saved every single recipe I get from the boxes for future use because they're just that good. And it's so easy, with all of the recipes taking about 30 minutes max and minimal effort. It's made sure that we both get to eat satisfying, healthy meals that we've made at home instead of resorting to ordering delivery, saving us time, energy, and money. For example, last week we cooked the pork egg roll in a bowl, and it was so delicious as usual. Hop on this deal while you can and use my code CASROSteak for $2.99 per meal on your first box, plus free steak for a month. Offer varies by plan, one free 10-ounce serving per box for 4 weeks with an active subscription. Thank you so much to EveryPlate for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about William Drummond Stewart. So obviously I have done a whole video on the topic of the queer Old West years ago, so if you would like an in-depth rundown on that, go watch that one. It's still good. But we'll do a brief overview so you get the idea. Also, before we get into it, a little commotion for author Michael Benemann, whose work on William Drummond Stewart and early American homosexuality was instrumental to my research in this video. Go check out his books and sources below, in particular these two, Men in Eden and Male-Male Intimacy in Early America. I also want to shout out Monica Rico and Tom Cunningham, who also wrote very good work on Stewart that I will also be referencing. So check out the sources. Per usual. Tracking gay men and women in the 18th and 19th century is so hard because obviously most of these people weren't running around advertising how gay they were, given the risk of punishment, imprisonment, exile, or death. The records we do have come from diaries, letters, articles, and legal records, and the diary and letter evidence is very few due to the ephemeral nature of paper and the fact that a majority of gay people's family or friends would burn their incriminating papers after death in order to preserve the family reputation. So we must assume that the true population of gay people was always much higher than the evidence we actually physically have, of which some does still persist. Although you still do get a lot of people casting doubt on writings being gay in a way that they never would with a heterosexual pair. As William Benemann points out in Male-Male Intimacy in Early America, if we open a letter written by a young woman and read, "Often too he shared my pillow, or I his, and how sweet to sleep with him, to hold his beloved form in my embrace, to have his arms about my neck, to imprint upon his face sweet kisses," we can reasonably assume that she and the man in question shared a sexual relationship. There is no justifiable grounds for changing that assumption when we learn that the words were actually written by Albert Dodd, a Yale undergraduate in the 1830s, describing his relationship with a fellow student, Anthony Hall. While it is true that people of the same sex in this time period, essentially the Romantic era, did write about and to each other in very floral, impassioned ways, there is still a spectrum there that tangibly skews beyond regular friendship into the realm of romantic friendship and sexual relationships. Oftentimes, a romantic friendship was an acceptable cover for a sexual one. It gave people plausible deniability. For a while, if you remained unmarried into middle and old age, you'd be called either a spinster for women or a confirmed bachelor for men. Obviously, spinsters earned much more scorn than confirmed bachelors, who were frequently viewed more lightly, but were still very much seen as having failed in their greatest job in life, as well as with suspicion. A confirmed bachelor had no wife with whom to express his sexuality safely, and it was believed that men naturally must have sex, so obviously the confirmed bachelor would be addressing his base animal needs with self-abuse, as they called it, hiring sex workers, or, God forbid, the worst one, with homosexuality. Thus, as time went on, the phrase confirmed bachelor became a euphemism for, oh, you know, he's gay. Benemann continues, a man who was interested in marriage presented society with an intolerable ambiguity which needed to be resolved. The solution for some men was simply to leave the community. The open sea promised an all-male environment accustomed to frank male-male sexuality. Newly opened territories also provided a setting where nuclear families were few and the expectation of marriage was temporarily suspended. In these female-deficient environments, men were free to turn to one another for sexual release, if they so desired. White men who headed west into the frontier did so knowing full well they may be going potentially years without encountering a woman. Unless, of course, you were open to pursuing an interracial relationship, in particular with a Native American woman, which, while taboo, was less so in the West. It was fairly commonplace. So it was a known reality that men were hooking up with and developing intense relationships with each other, heavily influenced by the way that frontiersmen became heavily integrated and exposed to various native groups who were open and accepting of homosexuality. They often had to rely on being in the native nation's good graces in order to survive the unfamiliar environment, and therefore frequently needed to learn their languages and become friends and partners. Nuance, nuance, nuance again. This means that many frontiersmen became very close to queer Native Americans and Two-Spirit people, or developed romantic and/or sexual relationships with them. Obviously, things were not idyllic or even good, and the frontiersmen often did enact violence or incite conflict with the tribes, increasingly so as pioneer families moved ever westward in greater and greater numbers, bringing with them traditional white values and beliefs. Nevertheless, integration of relationships between frontiersmen and Native Americans was extremely prominent. Something like 36% of fur traders who got married ended up marrying Native women, significantly because many of those women were actually interested in becoming translators or cultural liaisons between their tribe and the white men. Of the other percent of traders who got married, it was sometimes a marriage of convenience. A lot of them returned to the wild, never to see their wife again. Many of those men joined the unmarried confirmed bachelors in exploring what Benemann calls an Eden filled only with atoms, a place where men who loved men could experience romantic potential. Well known at that point, the Rockies were a clear draw for one queer man in particular, a Scottish aristocrat named William Drummond Stewart. Born December 26, 1795, William Drummond Stewart was raised in his ancestral home, Merthley Castle, in Scotland. At 18, he was gifted a place in the Dragoon Guard, specifically the 15th King's Light Dragoons, who famously had much sexier uniforms. So Stewart got to look good and fight Napoleon's army in France during the Peninsular War. He saw many battles, ending with Napoleon's defeat and earning him a medal for his efforts at Waterloo. Having successfully completed military service, Stewart became a dandy and spent his time partying, hunting, shopping, and gambling. The problem is, Stewart was actually the second son and had very little income to actually speak of. Plus, social tensions were afoot. Lord freaking Byron, who I've covered in his own video, had fled to the continent in scandal, partly because everyone knew about his homosexual proclivities. As well as the incest thing. That was kind of the bigger thing, actually. Unsurprisingly, the foppish Stewart was a big fan of Byron's works and was extremely clued into the drama surrounding him. It was not a good era to be gay in England. Numerous public executions for the crime of buggery and sodomy loomed over men's heads. So he did as closeted Victorian men do. He embarked on the classic gay boy vacation to Greece and Turkey, where homosexuality was treated much more loosely or even positively. He returned to an England that ramped things up by creating the London Metropolitan Police, further heightening the risk of punishment for gay men who became victims of police entrapment. It's likely this terrified Stewart, who randomly impregnated a maid named Christian Marie Battersby. She gave birth to their son, and while some records claim the two were hurriedly married, it's more likely they weren't. Stewart was clearly ashamed of his choices, though he took the bare minimum responsibility for them. He set up his son William and his baby mama up in a flat in Edinburgh and ensured that they always had enough money, but he refused to be a present father until much later in life, and even then it did not go well. In 1832, he departed England for the US, now intent on realizing his authentic lifestyle. It's impossible to say what Stewart's motivations with Christian were. Maybe it was a moment of delusion, maybe he genuinely liked her for a bit, maybe he was trying to fix himself and found that it failed, or like many gay men before him, he intended to create a wife and child as a sort of cover for his homosexuality. If anyone squints too hard at him, he can be like, no, look, I do normal thing with woman. I have sons, see? Over there. Way over there. Regardless, Stewart is officially done with his woman quota. His father had passed away in 1827, leaving his eldest son, John, as the head of the estate. William, to his dismay, was willed a comparatively pathetic 150 pounds a year, which is like 20.5 thousand in today's money, I think. We have no idea why he was given less money than his siblings, we can only speculate, but this seems like a relevant time to actually bring up Stewart's two fictionalized autobiographies, Altawan and Edward Warren. Now, again, these are fictionalized, but they also somehow do still mostly follow true events of Stewart's life, so they can act as sort of a point of implication for his murky childhood childhood because, as you may have noticed, I jumped right from his birth to him being 18 years old. What happened in those 18 years? We have absolutely no fucking idea. So, all we can do is try to scour these books for clues. So, Altawan is free to read on Google Books, but Edward Warren is not, but is, luckily, held in the Newberry Library collections. I love you, Newberry Library, my best friend. So I headed on over there to read it, and there's some interesting points in there that I think might be pertinent. In Altawan, one of the characters is drugged and taken to a mental asylum, and in Edward Warren, Edward's brief love interest, Isabella, is tasked by Edward's father to lure him away and be kidnapped and shut up in a madhouse. Both instances are done to prevent the character in question from marrying. Some historians speculate that this could imply that Stewart's father might have tried to have him institutionalized, perhaps due to his sexuality or due to the incident with Christian's pregnancy. Regardless, it would certainly explain the weird issue with the will and his meager inheritance. The books also contain some extremely prominent references to homosexuality. For one thing, in Altawan, the character Altawan falls in mutual love with Watto, a two-spirit Native American. Tragically, Watto is later killed in an ambush. Watto is described in Altawan and most texts as Berdache, the term that white settlers used to describe the Native Americans that didn't fit European standards of gender or sexuality. The term Berdache is derived from an old Arabic term to describe young boy sex workers or kept boys. Two-spirit was coined by Native groups in 1990 in order to provide a decolonized term for a very specific Native gender experience. Some Native writers have pointed out that it might be more useful to describe people using the specific terms that each tribe has for gender-variant peoples. For example, the Bote of the Crow Nation or the Natle of the Navajo Nation. I'm sorry if my pronunciation of those is lacking. I did look it up, I'm trying. Obviously, this is a discourse that I am not an expert voice on, and I defer to the Native American community on that. Unfortunately, Stewart is extremely unclear as to what specific nation Watto is supposed to be from, so that doesn't help. His writing is rambling and unclear at the best of times, so if I missed it, that's on me or him. In Edward Warren, Edward experiences numerous instances of homoerotic tension in his childhood, nursing back to health an injured Swiss teacher. In one passage he writes, "The night was hot. I threw off my clothes and then gathering a blanket round me, disposed myself to rest. My companion could not perceive that my eyes were open under the shadow of my arm, but I lay still as a statue. Opposite me lay him whom I know involuntarily watched. He was gazing upon me with the full force of his large gray eye. I felt relieved when his eyelid for a moment faltered. I cannot tell what feeling of fascination that look brought upon me, but it has never been forgotten." Later, Edward becomes close with a handsome Englishman named Lord Fernwold, who takes him to the popular cruising spot, Covent Garden, where Edward is nearly taken away by some horny dude before being rescued by Fernwold, who, quote, "held me fast, as if he intended me for his own prey." Fernwold asks Edward to come live with him the next day, saying, "You can come into my bedroom, which is divided from yours, you know, only by a passage, when the door is not bolted. And if I am asleep, your own good nature will prevent you waking me." While living together, Edward lays naked on his bed, and Fernwold seems unperturbed by all of this, sitting next to him. Fernwold said that he had a premonition that something terrible will happen to Edward due to his love for Isabella, correctly predicting the whole kidnapping and asylum thing. And he takes Edward's hand, asking him to promise not to get married until he has spoken to Fernwold about it. Edward does promise, writing, "There was something thrilled me to the core in the desponding of one so young, so bright, so beautiful, so beloved, of high rank and lineage, rarely equaled income, into the control of which he had not yet entered. We are all to a certain degree egotists, and I soon felt that if I could draw from him the sad tale of unfortunate love which so overpowered him, it would be an introduction which would embolden me to my own recital afterwards. Oh, but tell me, you may do it so low that you shall not hear your own words." And I drew his head down to my neck. Fernwold confesses to Edward that a doctor has only given him, Fernwold, 2 months to live. Edward collapses in shock, and Fernwold tells him not to worry about it, kisses his forehead, and leaves. I need to reiterate, Edward is nude this entire exchange. Edward, like Stewart, eventually departs his home for the American frontier. Demoralized and offended, the 32-year-old Stewart boarded a ship for America in 1832 to pursue an independent life. He arrived in New York City and soon departed due to a cholera outbreak, making his way west towards St. Louis, where he meets up with his eminent buddies William Sublette and Robert Campbell, two well-respected fur traders and, well, lifelong companions, almost. We have really no proof what their actual deal is, but one can guess. Campbell and Sublette would be Stewart's introduction to the world of the fur trade. Early American fur traders are a really interesting, unprecedentedly queer and gender-weird group by early Victorian standards. For one thing, as we've established, they were an entirely homosocial group, so there's step one, and they often chose and worked with one specific and special partner because hunting in large groups isn't really efficient. When trapping season ended in the winter, the hunters would gather up in lodge camps to wait out the cold, creating brief all-male communities where the younger men took on the more feminine roles, and it was well known that homosexuality was prevalent in this culture. And a short-lived culture it was. The fur trade would collapse in the 1840s due to the overhunting of the beaver and the larger skewing of fashion trends away from beaver hats towards silk. In 1833, Stewart and his new pals set off on their journey to the mountains, accompanied by 40 other men, including one seriously sexy dude named George Holmes, that everyone dubbed Beauty. Of course, he and Stewart got real close. Stewart also was hell-bent on proving his worth. He's not just a sissy aristocrat. He fought in a war, after all, for fuck's sake. So he took on loads of camp chores and became known as the guy who can kill a buffalo in one shot at full speed on horseback. Not an easy thing to accomplish, I assure you. In another incident, the party was being attacked by a pissed-off grizzly bear that no one could take down, and Stewart also got that one in one shot. So everyone kind of agreed that Stewart might be a little weird, but he's definitely useful, and they dubbed him the Captain. Sadly, George Holmes, aka Beauty, died in a freak rabid wolf attack on the Trapper Rendezvous in 1833. One night, a raging wolf tore into camp and bit several men viciously on the face, and it did a number on Holmes. Now infected with rabies, became depressed, angry, and confused as the days went on, turning later to seizures, hydrophobia, and delusions. One day, he tore his clothes off and ran naked into the wild, and was never seen again. Stewart felt immense remorse over Holmes' death because the two of them had been camp roommates in the makeshift shelter at the rendezvous, and the night of the attack, Stewart had asked Holmes to sleep outside so Stewart could spend the night with a guest, if you get what I mean. Benemann theorizes that this guest may have been a certain guy named Antoine Clement, who Stewart met at the rendezvous and would become Stewart's partner of many years. Antoine Clement was Métis, or a mixed white Native American hunter. His father was French-Canadian and his mother was half Cree, and he was by that point already well known as one of the greatest hunters of the West. He was also catty, confrontational, and an alcoholic. Stewart was obsessed with him. Antoine does appear as two different characters in Edward Warren, being described by Edward as viscerally beautiful to the point of rendering him mute. In one passage, Edward says, "But will you never tell me your name?" I said one evening, after he had come back from a temporary absence, during which I had in vain searched for him. "I could not call you had there been anything amiss. And besides, it is so stupid not to have a name. I never tell my name, but you may give me one, and I will answer to it faithfully as a dog. Will that please you?" he said, as he ran his fingers through my entangled locks and looked down on my face, which lay in his lap. "Call me Sancho, and I am your squire." They had an interesting game of cat and mouse going on. Clement refused to respect Stewart as an authority figure, and Stewart found that really enticing. It helped that Clement was sexy and talented. He could leave at any point in time, he could work for anyone, but despite his bad attitude and strong words, he stayed. Stewart followed Antoine back into the wild after the rendezvous, when most of the rest of his party instead returned to St. Louis. Sublette and Campbell soon retired the fur trade together on their shared ranch and opened a mercantile in St. Louis. I mean, it wasn't actually a happy ending for them. They had other bullshit going on involving Campbell randomly getting married and pissing everybody off, but that is not the point of this video. Anyway, Stewart and Clement made their way into Crow Nation territory. They spent most of 1834 hunting through the Rockies, having flings with random dudes, and getting into kerfuffles with other traders. Stewart then wintered at Fort Vancouver, and the couple rejoined together in 1835 to head back to St. Louis, where Clement's family lived. Stewart was not happy at all to return to white civilization. He felt deeply uncomfortable and restrained, made worse by the deluge of mail that arrived from his family in Scotland, informing him that his older brother John was using the family fortune to build a new Mirthly castle. There was already an old one. New Mirthly Castle does not exist today, if that gives you an idea of how well that went. Stewart was probably really pissed off that he had been denied what he saw as his rightful inheritance, only for his older brother to squander it. The longer he stayed in the cities, including New Orleans, the faster Stewart's taste for the finer things in life returned. The next year, Stewart wintered in Cuba, intent to explore any and all climates, and he was there and then off to Charleston with his new friend Adolph Sillam, who would remain his companion on his travels for a long while until 1836, when Sillam returned to his home of Hamburg, Germany. It was at this point that Stewart was informed that his older brother John was terminally ill and still childless. With this on his mind, Stewart met back up with Clement, and the two headed down to New Orleans, where they meet the artist, Alfred Jacob Miller, who would be the guy to paint numerous portraits of the two and their adventures. Stewart asked Miller to accompany him into the Rockies, where he would produce sketches and watercolor drafts to later turn into full-scale oil paintings. The trio then moved north to St. Louis to gather more dudes for their grand expedition, and in 1837 they set back off into the wild. They go to the wild and then back to the city, and then they go to the wild and then back out to the city. At some point in all of this, Stewart sued John for his inheritance, including the money that was owed to him by their recently deceased aunt. He also randomly converted to Catholicism. Early the following year, John died after a prolonged conflict with his wife over his will. Their younger brother George succeeded in wresting back control of the family estate, which now belonged to William. Knowing that he must return to Scotland and settle his matters, Stewart asked Antoine Clement to come home with him. Clement, despite all odds, agreed, and the couple boarded a ship to cross the Atlantic to the Old World. Upon arriving in Scotland, though, the heavy weight of his home country's conservatism returned to his shoulders, and he decided that he probably should keep up a ruse by staying with Clement in a lodge on the grounds, claiming that Clement was his valet. Obviously and hilariously, this only made people in the area way more suspicious of them. There was a persistent myth that Stewart also brought back to Scotland 3 other unnamed Native Americans who allegedly were tasked as servants at Mirthly Castle. Historian Tom F. Cunningham explored this myth in great depth a few years ago in his article, The Phantom Indians of Mirthly Castle, for the English Westerner Society. Though it's extremely hard to locate, luckily the Newberry Library had it. He was unable to locate any reliable proof or even evidence that Stewart did bring other Native Americans to Scotland other than Antoine Clement, so I think we can write that one off. But what he apparently did bring over, though, was a small herd of buffalo. In 1842, after finally clearing his older brother's debts and getting his affairs settled, Stewart once more decided to return to the Rocky Mountains now that he was wealthy. Stewart and Clement arrived in the US with some strange items. The crew made their way up the Mississippi River the next year and began recruiting lively young men to join their party into the mountains, where they intended to have a debaucherous, lavish party in nature like no one had ever seen. These were urban, decidedly foppish men for the most part, and also some more rugged men, and Antoine Clement's 15-year-old brother Francois, who was a favorite of Stewart. Most importantly, the strange items in question were actually custom-made medieval and Renaissance costumes, finely crafted from colorful velvet, lace, and gold. This expedition would also be reported on in the New Orleans Daily Picayune in bits by journalist Matt Field, partly because word had already spread around about the group and people definitely wanted to hear all about it. Off they went, putting along westward. But in summer, tragedy struck the otherwise lively party. One day, the men heard the bang of a rifle and the screams of a young man. They rushed to the scene to find Stewart holding Francois Clement in his arms, blood rushing from the boy's chest. Stewart screamed for the doctor, but nothing could be done. Francois asked them to leave him, and he called for Antoine, giving him one last kiss, weeping that he would never see their mother again. The doctor administered a sedative to relieve his pain, and the boy passed away in his sleep. What happened was, Francois had reached into a tent or bag, it's not super clear, to grab a rifle, and it had discharged directly into his chest point blank. Antoine spent hours with the body, whispering and kissing him, but the crew had to go on. They left him there to grieve, and he caught up with them later. After a long time traveling, the crew finally reached what is now Fremont's Lake, and they set up their colorful camp, and everyone received their costumes. Thus, the merry and gay party began. A nearby German hunter named Friedrich Armand Struberg witnessed this fantastical caravan, writing in his memoir, "Many young dandies from the large, luxurious eastern cities of this continent, as well as from those of the old world, reared in salons, cafes, opera, and concert halls, had followed their fantasies in the choice of their clothing and appeared in old chivalrous costumes, with large plumed hats with rolled-up brims, jerkins with slit sleeves, leather leggings, tall riding boots with enormous spurs, large gauntlets, and they had girded on their ancestral swords. Others had preferred the old Spanish costume and had draped themselves with broad violet blue and May green velvet greatcoats. Still others had remained true to the appearance of the gentleman from Broadway in New York, replacing the top hat with a wide-brimmed one, and went around the fire in comfortable slippers, smoking their Havana cigars." Struberg then met Stewart, recognizing him as the two had already met 10 years prior on the East Coast. He was treated to the many delights of food from the party, many games and competitions and dances, and Shakespearean performances were had. It was like a gay fever dream unlike nothing ever seen before. Of course, not all was perfectly well. Some fights broke out, some men were kicked out, some of the discharged men returned to St. Louis, where they were kind of cagey about what actually happened on their trip. Others told the press that Stewart was overbearing and rude and tyrannical. The libelous rumors began to circulate more and more, and by the time Stewart returned from his daydream to the cities, his reputation had preceded him. It threatened to grow into full-on scandal as rumors evolved and were dangerously close to exposing details about him that would make his life fairly hostile. It's possible that these discharged members of the traveling party spreading these rumors had either become disgusted by the open displays of effeminate queerness, or they had at some point been sexually approached by somebody, possibly by Stewart. It would certainly explain why so many people were afraid to come to his public defense. And Stewart himself, a landed aristocrat and gentleman, had pride too strong to try starting any fights to clear his name. He may have feared that defending himself could damage his reputation further, and so he chose perhaps the safest option. He chose to fade away. Stewart and Antoine agreed to part ways for the final time in St. Louis. They never saw each other again. Stewart returned to Scotland in 1844, where he reconnected with his now 15-year-old son, Will. He was never very fond of him, though, and tried to sever his legal obligation to leave the estate to Will on his passing. This was in part because Will was a party boy who spent most of his time drinking and gambling. Stewart could excuse partying, obviously, but he could not excuse a lack of self-respect and tastelessness. After one too many incidents, Stewart banned his son from Merthley Castle. Within a few years, two of his younger brothers, Thomas and George, died. In 1856, Christian died. His remaining brother was Archibald, who fucking hated him. In 1868, Will sued Stewart for the inheritance and won. Still banned from Merthley Castle, he left for extended travels, where he died in a freak sword-swallowing accident. Yes, that's literally what happened. The dude got drunk and tried to do a sword-swallowing trick. For one thing, he didn't swallow a sword, he swallowed a stick. His lungs were damaged and he died fairly quickly. In order to give one last fuck you to Archibald, Stewart sold the last two family estates, Mirthley and Grantully. His remaining inheritance passed on to Frank or Frank Nichols Stewart, his Texan adoptive son that everyone hated. Long story. Shortly after, Sir William Drummond Stewart caught pneumonia and passed away April 28, 1871. Frank stripped Mirthley Castle of everything he possibly could and sold it off. The locals hated him so much he refused to leave the estate in fears of being murdered, and the locals claimed he was trying to murder them. Mess. Just a damn mess. Antoine Clement eventually married, but would not spend very long with his wife. His alcoholism intensified, and he joined the army in the Mexican-American War at Santa Fe. He left society once more to live in the great wilds thereafter. William Drummond Stewart's story is such an interesting microcosm of so many different intertwining histories. The strange world of the frontier and the fur trade, the bizarreness of a Scottish gentleman roaming around out there, his queerness, his brief but famous attempt at creating a gay utopia that was seemingly the ancestor of the modern Renaissance fair. What a wild ride. We hear so much about queer historical figures who were forced to hide themselves in order to survive, so it's always fascinating to find one who managed to thrive instead in his own way, even if only briefly. Thank you for learning with me about William Drummond Stewart. What a guy. Don't forget to grab a copy of my graphic novel, Liberated: The Radical Art and Life of Claude Cahun, and until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and remember gun safety.